Disclaimer: this video presents tactical and strategic analysis based on real military capabilities and publicly available information. Some elements present hypothetical scenarios for educational and entertainment purposes. February 10th, 2026, 0317 local time. The Persian Gulf. The USS Stout is alone. Not strategically alone. The Eisenhower carrier strike group is 90 nautical miles to the south. But tactically, operationally, in this exact moment, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer is the only American warship within 40 miles of contested water. 329 sailors. 67 consecutive days at sea. 23 transit escorts completed. 4 suspicious vessels intercepted. Thousands of square miles of Iranian military activity tracked and logged. Tonight should be routine. Another patrol, another data collection mission. Another long night of watching glowing radar screens and drinking bad coffee in the Combat Information Center. At 0317, routine ended. What happened to the USS Stout in the next 29 minutes would demonstrate two things simultaneously: the terrifying vulnerability of even the most advanced warships on Earth, and the absolute, overwhelming speed of American military retaliation. This is the complete tactical breakdown. Section 1. The Gulf in 2026. To understand what happened on February 10th, you need to understand where it happened. The Persian Gulf in early 2026 was not the Persian Gulf of previous years. 4 months of escalating confrontations had transformed the waterway from a tense but manageable environment to something that could only be described as an active combat zone. Every American ship operating in the Gulf was under modified rules of engagement. Weapon systems stayed permanently hot. Crews maintained heightened readiness around the clock. Sleep was rationed. Meals were eaten at battle stations. Nerves were stretched to the breaking point. The psychological weight of sustained high readiness operations is something that doesn't appear in official reports, but it is real, and it affects everything. Decision speed, reaction time. The ability to think clearly at 0317 in the morning, after 67 days at sea. The Iranians understood this. They had adapted their tactics accordingly. Their fast attack boats no longer operate in predictable patrol patterns that American radar operators could memorize and dismiss. Their shore-based missile batteries had been dispersed across the coastline and hardened against previous American strikes. Their intelligence networks had been rebuilt and expanded after earlier losses. They knew American patrol schedules. They tracked American ship movements with a level of precision that should have alarmed Pentagon planners. They waited, patiently, methodically, for the right ship, in the right position, at the right moment. The opportunity came at 0317. Section 2. The Shadow Launch. The Stout was transiting northwest, following the standard shipping lane that hugs the Saudi coastline, a route her crew had run dozens of times. Familiar water, known risks. Her ANSP-1D phased array radar was simultaneously tracking 47 separate contacts. Merchant ships plowing through the dark water towards Hormuz, fishing boats working the shallower coastal areas, oil platforms standing silent in the distance, and 3 Iranian Revolutionary Guard patrol craft maintaining a respectful 15 nautical mile distance from the American destroyer. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, nothing that broke the pattern of 100 previous nights. But the radar wasn't seeing everything. This was the trap. In the months preceding February 10th, Iranian military planners had developed and refined a new anti-ship tactic. They called it shadow launching. The concept was straightforward, but devastatingly effective. Mobile missile batteries would position themselves behind terrain features, rocky promontories, ridgelines, coastal geography that blocked direct radar observation from American warships operating in the shipping lanes. Forward spotters positioned with line of sight to the target would provide real-time targeting data back to the concealed battery via encrypted communications. The battery could fire without ever being seen. The Stout's radar could see the 3 Iranian patrol craft maintaining their careful distance. It could track every merchant vessel in the lane. It could monitor the oil platforms in the fishing boats. It could not see the Nor anti-ship missile battery hidden behind a rocky promontory 31 nautical miles to the northeast. At 031714, that battery fired. Section 3. Inbound. The Nor missile, a Chinese C-802 variant manufactured under license in Iran, launched from its concealed position with a burst of flame and exhaust that would have been visible for miles, if anyone had been watching. No one was. The missile climbed briefly after launch, following a standard ballistic arc that would register momentarily on radars in ascending contact. Then it dropped, hard and fast, down to sea-skimming altitude, 15 meters above the surface of the water. Speed, Mach 0.9. At that altitude and at that speed, The missile was effectively invisible to the Stout's radar. The curvature of the Earth and the radar horizon worked in Iran's favor. The Nor was flying below the detection threshold, hugging the wavetops, its guidance system making continuous microcorrections to maintain altitude. Invisible, fast, locked. The Stout's AN/SLQ-32 electronic warfare system detected the missile's active radar secret 031741, 27 seconds after launch. 27 seconds of complete invisibility. In naval combat, 27 seconds is not a short time. It is an eternity. It is the difference between a controlled defensive response and a catastrophic failure of the entire defensive system. The moment the seeker was detected, the AN/SLQ-32 immediately classified the contact as a hostile inbound anti-ship missile. Alarms detonated throughout every compartment of the ship simultaneously. The Combat Information Center erupted into what naval officers describe as controlled chaos. Every trained instinct, every drilled response, every simulator hour activated at once. Time to impact, approximately 85 seconds.
Here is what Hollywood consistently gets wrong about naval missile defense. The Aegis combat system does not wait for human beings to process information, deliberate, and decide. It is not designed to wait. It was specifically engineered to react at speeds that exceed human cognitive capability. Within 2 seconds of threat classification, the Aegis system had already calculated a complete engagement solution. It had identified the optimal interceptor missiles. It had computed the launch timing, the intercept geometry, the probability of kill. It was requesting weapons release. But here is the critical point that defines the entire system. Weapons release requires human authorization. A machine can calculate the solution. A machine cannot pull the trigger. Someone has to make the decision. Someone has to accept the responsibility. Someone has to live with what happens next. At 031741, that someone was Lieutenant Commander Patricia Vance, Tactical Action Officer on duty, 11 years of naval service, hundreds of simulator runs through exactly this scenario, every variable, every threat profile, every engagement geometry. She had never done it for real. No amount of simulation fully prepares a human being for the moment when the alarm is not a training alarm, when the contact is not a simulated contact, when the decision is not a scored exercise with an after-action review. At 031744, 3 seconds after detection, Lieutenant Commander Vance authorized weapons free. The first SM-2 Block 3AA missile left its vertical launch cell at 031746, riding a column of fire into the dark sky above the Persian Gulf. The second followed exactly 1 second later. Standard doctrine, 2 interceptors per threat, redundancy built into the engagement to maximize probability of kill. The SM-2 is exceptionally fast, Mach 3.5 in the intercept phase, but the engagement geometry was brutally challenging. The Nor was already inside 20 nautical miles and closing at Mach 0.9. The intercept window was narrow. The margin for error was measured in meters and milliseconds. At 031752, the first SM-2 reached its target. Miss. The proximity fuse detonated at the calculated range, but the Nor was 12 meters outside the lethal fragmentation radius. The warhead shrapnel peppered the Iranian missile's airframe. Damage was confirmed, but the missile was not destroyed. The Nor kept coming. Damaged, trailing debris, guidance system flickering, but still locked on the Stout, still on course, still lethal. At 031754, the second SM-2 struck. Direct hit. The Nor missile disintegrated in a flash of light 4.7 nautical miles from the Stout's bow. Debris rained into the Gulf. The threat was eliminated. The tactical action officer had done her job. The engagement was over. Except it wasn't. Except it wasn't. What the crew of the USS Stout did not know, what they could not have known, what their sensors had failed to detect, Iran had fired 2 missiles, not 1. The second Nor had launched from the same battery 8 seconds after the first, following a slightly offset flight path designed to approach the target from a marginally different angle. But its most important feature was not its flight path. It was its position in the launch sequence. The second missile had been flying directly behind the first, using the radar cross-section of the lead missile as cover, a technique that military analysts would later call trailer hiding. One missile screened by another. The second invisible, not because of terrain or altitude, but because of the radar shadow cast by its partner. The moment the first Nor was destroyed, the screen disappeared. The AN/SLQ-32 detected the second missile at 031757. Time to impact, 23 seconds. 23 seconds. That number defines everything that followed, because 23 seconds is not enough time to launch another SM-2, not enough time to complete the guidance sequence, not enough time to execute a second missile intercept. The engagement envelope had collapsed. The Phalanx close-in weapons system was already tracking. The Phalanx is the last line of defense on an American warship, a 20mm M61A1 Vulcan Gatling gun mounted in a self-contained weapon system.
radar, fire control, power supply, all integrated into a single autonomous platform. 4,500 rounds per minute. At 03:17:59, phalanx opened fire. The sound of a phalanx engagement is described by sailors who have heard it as a sound unlike anything else in the world. A continuous mechanical roar, not individual shots, a solid stream of depleted uranium and tungsten penetrators reaching out across the water toward the incoming missile at the speed of sound. Rounds began striking the Nor at 03:18:01. The missile's flight path wobbled. Its PAGN system began to degrade under the impact of continuous hits. Its airframe was being systematically shredded at close range. At 03:18:03, the warhead detonated. Not from a direct phalanx hit to the fuse, from accumulated structural damage. The phalanx had destroyed enough of the missile's critical systems that something catastrophic failed inside the airframe. The detonation happened 340 meters from the Stout's starboard side. 340 meters sounds like a safe distance. Stand at one end of 3 football fields and look at the other end. That is how far away the warhead detonated. It is not a safe distance. A Nor missile carries a 165 kilogram semi-armor piercing warhead. When that warhead detonates, it does not simply explode. It creates a supersonic blast wave that propagates outward in every direction simultaneously. It generates thousands of fragments ranging in size from ball bearings to dinner plates, each traveling at thousands of feet per second. At 340 meters, the blast wave had lost significant energy, but it had not lost all of it. The Stout rocked violently. Not the gentle roll of heavy seas, a sharp, violent lateral movement that threw sailors off their feet and against bulkheads throughout the ship. Equipment shifted. Unsecured items became projectiles. Alarms that had been sounding since 03:17 were joined by new alarms as systems registered the blast effects. The fragments arrived faster than the blast wave. Traveling at thousands of feet per second, the warhead fragments crossed 340 meters in less than 1 second after detonation. Most struck the water surface, throwing columns of spray into the night air. Dozens struck the Stout superstructure, leaving impact marks that damage assessors would catalog for weeks. One fragment, later estimated at 2.3 kilograms, penetrated the hull plating near the waterline on the south side. It passed through an equipment room, narrowly missed a sleeping off-watch sailor by less than a meter, and lodged itself in an interior bulkhead. 3 smaller fragments struck the reinforced bridge windows simultaneously. The glass held, but the impact startled the bridge crew, at a moment when startling the bridge crew was the last thing anyone needed. One fragment struck Petty Officer Second Class James Morrison. Morrison was on the weather deck, conducting a routine equipment inspection. The fragment hit his left thigh with enough force to drop him immediately. He went down hard on the deck, unable to stand, bleeding into the cold night air above the Persian Gulf. The fragment had missed his femoral artery by 2 centimeters. 2 centimeters. The width of a thumb. The difference between a wounded sailor and a dead one. The time was 03:17:54. The Stout was not sinking. Her propulsion systems were intact. Her weapon systems were operational. Her combat capability was not critically degraded. But she had been hit. An American warship, operating in waters where American warships had sailed for decades as symbols of uncontested power, had taken a direct hit from an Iranian anti-ship missile. A sailor was bleeding on the deck.
Section 7. The Decision. Captain Robert Chen reached the bridge at 03:19:12. He had been in his cabin when the engagement began, the first time he had attempted to sleep in 40 consecutive hours. The sounds of missile launches, phalanx fire, and the detonation had brought him running through the ship's passageways. What he found was controlled chaos in the process of becoming controlled. The Combat Information Center was tracking the 3 Iranian patrol craft, all of which were now accelerating away from the area at maximum speed. The damage control teams were assessing the hull penetration. The corpsman was treating Morrison on the weather deck. The communications officer was simultaneously attempting to establish contact with Fifth Fleet while monitoring the tactical net. And Lieutenant Commander Vance was asking the question that every officer on the bridge was thinking. Sir, do we have weapons release authority for the launch site? Captain Chen faced a decision that military historians and Naval War College instructors would analyze for decades. The facts were not in dispute. He had a wounded sailor. He had a damaged ship. He had radar tracks, missile debris, and trajectory analysis that pointed with certainty to a specific location on the Iranian coastline. The site from which the missiles had been fired was 31 nautical miles to the northeast. Standing rules of engagement, as modified for operations in the Persian Gulf, authorized him to respond to hostile fire. He did not need permission from Fifth Fleet. He did not need authorization from Central Command. He did not need approval from Washington. He could fire right now. But he also understood the weight of what firing meant. Tomahawk cruise missiles striking Iranian territory, the diplomatic consequences, the escalation risk, the possibility that 4 missiles fired in the next few minutes could set in motion a chain of events that no one in the chain of command had authorized or anticipated. He thought about his options for exactly 90 seconds. At 03:20:00, Captain Chen ordered weapons release on the confirmed launch site. 4 Tomahawk land attack missiles, coordinates derived directly from the incoming missile trajectories and the radar tracks of the Iranian patrol craft spotters. He then transmitted his report to Fifth Fleet. Stout engaged by Iranian anti-ship missiles. 1 sailor wounded, minor hull damage. Have initiated counter-battery fire. 4 T-land inbound to launch site. Request additional strike authorization for expanded target set.
The report reached Vice Admiral Santos at 03:23. She had two options. Countermand Chen's strike, complicated by the fact that 4 Tomahawks were already in flight and would require active termination commands that might not reach them in time, or expand it. She chose expansion. At 03:26, Santos authorized a supplementary strike package. The logic was coldly simple. If Chen's 4 Tomahawks destroyed the battery that had fired, they would not destroy the batteries that had not fired, and those batteries would still be there tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. The expanded target set included 3 additional suspected missile positions along the same stretch of Iranian coastline. Intelligence confidence on the targets varied significantly. One site was confirmed active with high confidence, one was assessed as probable, one was classified as possible. After a direct missile attack on an American destroyer, possible was close enough. The assets were already moving. The cruiser USS Gulf, operating 60 nautical miles to the south, began launching Tomahawks at 03:31, 8 missiles, 2 per target. The destroyer USS Mitchell, 45 nautical miles to the west, added 4 more. Her commanding officer had monitored the entire engagement in real time and had pre-positioned her weapon systems for exactly this contingency. Total strike package, 16 Tomahawk cruise missiles, 4 separate Iranian military installations, a response assembled and launched in less time than it takes most people to drive to work. The first missile, one of Chen's original 4, struck at 03:44. The Nor battery that had attacked the USS Stout occupied a rocky outcropping overlooking the Gulf. 2 launcher vehicles, 1 radar unit, 1 command vehicle, approximately 20 personnel who had been congratulating themselves on a successful attack. The Tomahawk approached from the northwest, following a circuitous routing designed to avoid Iranian air defense radar coverage. It descended to altitude 3 meters above the terrain. The terminal guidance system locked onto its pre-programmed coordinates with sub-10 meter precision. The first missile struck the command vehicle. 4 operators killed instantly. The battery's ability to coordinate fire destroyed in the same moment. The second missile arrived 11 seconds later, radar unit. The battery was now blind and leaderless. The third and fourth missiles hit the launcher vehicles. Secondary explosions from propellant detonation confirmed total destruction. The battery that had fired on the USS Stout ceased to exist at 03:45, 29 minutes after the first missile struck. By 03:52, all 16 Tomahawks had reached their targets. Results: 1 confirmed battery destroyed, 1 coastal radar installation destroyed, 1 missile component warehouse destroyed, 1 decoy site hit, 1 empty field cratered where a mobile battery had been 6 hours earlier. The cost to Iran: 1 operational missile battery eliminated, 1 critical radar node destroyed, unknown quantities of stored missile components lost, an estimated 30 to 40 military personnel killed. The cost to America: 1 wounded sailor, minor hull damage requiring 2 weeks in dry dock, 16 Tomahawk missiles at approximately $1.5 million each. The aftermath. Petty Officer James Morrison was evacuated to the U.S. military hospital in Bahrain by helicopter the following morning. The surgeons who treated him noted that the fragment had missed his femoral artery by 2 centimeters, a distance so small it is almost meaningless as a measurement, a distance that determined whether his family received a phone call or a visit from a uniformed officer at their front door. He would undergo 6 months of rehabilitation. He would walk again. He would not return to sea duty. Captain Robert Chen received a letter of commendation from the Chief of Naval Operations. His decision to initiate counter-battery fire without awaiting higher authorization was officially deemed tactically sound and strategically appropriate given the circumstances. The letter did not mention that he had also been fortunate. Fortunate that his Tomahawk struck legitimate military targets. Fortunate that the warehouse strike caused no confirmed civilian casualties. Fortunate that the Iranian response to the American counterstrike did not include another missile salvo that night. The diplomatic aftermath followed its predictable pattern. Iran condemned the American strikes as unprovoked acts of aggression against sovereign Iranian territory. They released footage of what they claimed was destroyed civilian infrastructure. Independent analysts with access to satellite imagery determined the footage was from a different location entirely. The United States defended the strikes as proportional self-defense under international law and the laws of armed conflict. Pentagon briefers presented the radar tracks, the missile trajectory analysis, and fragments recovered from the Stout. The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session. Russia and China blocked any resolution condemning either party. The session ended without action, as most people expected it would. Oil prices rose 8% within 24 hours before stabilizing. Insurance premiums for Gulf shipping increased for the 3rd time in 4 months. And in the Persian Gulf, the calculus of deterrence adjusted once more.
The 29-minute response demonstrated something that American adversaries needed to understand clearly. American commanders operating in the Persian Gulf did not need Washington's permission to fight back. The authority had been delegated. The weapons were ready. The doctrine was clear. Attack an American ship and the response would come fast. Not fast enough to prevent the initial attack. No defensive system is perfect. But fast enough and overwhelming enough to ensure that whoever fired the first shot paid an immediate and severe price. 29 minutes from attack to response. 2 centimeters from a severed artery. 340 meters from catastrophe. Modern warfare lives in these margins. The gap between an incident and a war. The gap between a wounded sailor and a dead one. The gap between a damaged ship and a sinking one. These margins are where navies operate, where commanders make decisions in 90 seconds that analysts spend years examining, where technology and human judgment combine in ways that no simulator can fully replicate. The Persian Gulf is still there. The ships are still sailing. The margins are still narrow. Subscribe now and turn on notifications, because the next engagement is already being planned, and you will not want to miss what comes next.